Comrade, we are live. You can start.
Dear comrades, now in the next 45 to 1 hour, I shall try to explain 4 sets of issues. I'll start with a brief description about the present economic crisis the country is facing and how the stance of the central government on GST compensation is going to negatively impact on the crisis worsening. 2. Then I shall go to give a very brief outline of what this GST compensation is about and what was the understanding at the time when GST was agreed upon. Third, I will then explain how Centre's stance is legally and morally untenable and why states can never accept the two proposals that are put forward by the center. And finally, I will try to locate this contestation in the large context of center-state relations and growing fiscal imbalance in federal India. This is broadly what I want to do. Now, the statistics for GDP for the last quarter has come in. India economy is going to shrink by 24%. Earlier, everybody was saying that India may contract by 5% for the whole year. Now that the last quarter GDP has come in, now everybody is revising the figures for the annual figures. Now everybody is agreed upon 9 to 10% contraction in the economy. We have already data for about 60 countries in the world, including all the OECD countries and some of the other developing countries. And for all the countries other than Vietnam and China, the economy has shrunk. But if you take the average contraction, it's only 12.5%. But Indian economy has contracted by 24%. That shows how severe the recession in our country is. Now, why is it happening? The reason is very simple. The commodities produced in the economy are not being sold. If all the commodities produced are sold, the market will clear, there should be no crisis at all. Therefore, we have to examine who are the people who are buying these commodities. One is consumers, the consumption demand, they account for about 60% of the total demand. Then there are investors who invest in factories and construction roads and so on, investment demand, which is around 30% or less. And finally, there are export, and they contribute to around 10%, a little more of the total demand. Now, investment demand has contracted by 47%, exports are half, and the major component of the demand, consumer demand, it has declined by 27% when compared to last year. Now, if this cannot be sold, who will ever invest? And therefore, there's no point in trying to focus upon investment at this point of time. India government has got to do something to boost the consumption demand and create market conditions for investment. And therefore, what is the government to do? Government has to increase the expenditure, consumption expenditure. Government has to significantly be increased. Now, crucial point: states account for 60% of the overall government expenditure in India. And then when these states prepared our budget, we assumed that our GST revenue, which is the most important source of revenue for the states, would increase by 14%. So we have factored in this in. Now, Government of India says overall GST revenue, there will be a shortfall of 3 lakh crores of rupees. And they are taking a stand. We will not compensate for the loss suffered in GST revenue because of COVID. So they are trying to distinguish between loss due to COVID and loss due to other factors. That is to say, COVID is an act of God. And therefore, Government of India has no obligation to pay for the loss suffered in the GST revenue because of COVID. But suppose there was no COVID and the economy had continued to grow as during the pre-COVID times, then how much revenue loss would there be? They have calculated that. They have said it is something like 97,000 crores that we will provide. So overall, the states, instead of getting 3 lakh crores, they are assured of the 97,000 crores plus 70,000 crores which may come in the cess. And so they will lose something like 1.5 lakh crores of rupees. To that extent, the states of India will be forced to cut their expenditure because revenue is not there. The states can't print notes. States cannot borrow with the center's permission. So only alternative option for them would be to cut expenditure. Now, we are not discussing about expanding expenditure. I am only aspiring to maintain my expenditure in the budget. And here is a central government who, facing the most severe recession in the history of India, telling the states, now you squeeze your expenditure. It's crazy macroeconomics. That's my starting point. You see. The whole stance of the central government does not make any macroeconomic sense, logic. This will worsen the recession in India and worsen the suffering of people in India. Look at the other countries in the world. India government has the most conservative stimulus package. Look, they are saying we have a package of 21 lakh crore rupees. And our criticism is all bogus. But still, they are saying, swearing by 21 lakh rupees, with which they are going to support the corporates, the MSME sector, the banks, and so on. But not the state governments, yeah? All that is required is something additional 1.5 lakh crore rupees. Don't they think it's an important component of the overall demand that has to be maintained? So this whole argument of the center is untenable by principles of economic science. Now, what is this GST compensation about? 3 years back, India ushered in the GST, Goods and Service Tax, the new tax. Before GST, all the states had VAT tax, value-added tax. Value-added tax simply means that you pay a good maybe changing hands number of times before it reaches the consumer. At every transaction stage in the transaction, some value is added to that. Say, suppose a commodity of 100 rupees, when it's sold, a 10% tax is impose. Now it gets an intermediate seller. Then that guy sells it for, say, with his profit for 120 rupees. Then again 10% tax. That's say 12 rupees as tax. So at every stage, suppose 10% is imposed, then it will be a case of tax upon tax. Therefore, they said it has a cascading effect. It leads to inflation, very high tax burden. Therefore, they try to bring in what is called value added tax. Whenever a person sells any commodity, the one who buys will have to pay a tax. But this entire tax needn't be given to the government. They can minus from that, deduct from that, the tax they gave when they purchased the commodity. Only net tax has to be given. That is to say, only tax on value addition. So this VAT tax system was existing in every state. Then there was other indirect taxes, minor taxes, and central government was imposing excise duty at the point of production. And then there was service tax. So there were a number of indirect taxes. So a proposal was made. There is value added system within the state. But this VAT system starts only when the commodity enters the market, okay, the state market. Suppose I am importing a commodity for say 100 rupees, one unit. I might have paid 20% tax, excise duty. I might have paid a service tax. So all included in the 100. But when I enter Kerala, I cannot get these taxes I had paid in other state. I will be the in Kerala, the first point, the old principle of tax upon tax comes in. So they wanted to make VATable throughout India, so that wherever in India you pay the tax, the next sale you can get a credit for it. So this was the first principle of GST. That VAT tax system must be interlinked and made all India. Second, all these indirect taxes must be put into one single tax, including service tax, which are all VATable. So you have some single integrated goods and service tax. Now this has a lot of merits and demerits, but major issue with respect to the federal system like India is that states will have to surrender their tax rights. Now each state cannot make its law. A institution combining center and states will have to be ushered in to administer this tax. Center also surrenders the excise duty and some of the minor taxes, but of the total tax revenue of the center, what they surrender is only around 35% or less. While for the states, they would have to surrender 70% of the tax. VAT tax contributed to around 60% and 10% of other taxes. That is something like 70% of the taxes. So states' fiscal autonomy to that extent is abridged. Say, for example, in Kerala, we believe in big spending. Okay, we support education, healthcare, this and that. That's the tradition Kerala. Now, therefore, how do I finance this? It can be financed only if there is a revenue. But now suppose I want to expand further the services. I have, for example, we think we must have welfare system in Kerala, something similar to Nordic countries. Then there's only way is that I increase my tax revenue. But today, Kerala wouldn't have the choice. Kerala wouldn't have the choice. Freedom to choose the path of development. Because the amount of revenue you can raise has been restricted by all India laws, GST law. So states lose their fiscal autonomy. And that's the greatest danger that states face. And for this reason, and many other reservations, states were unwilling to agree to GST. It was then a proposal was made. Why do you fear? Your VAT tax is increasing only at 10%. We guarantee you 14% increase in the GST year after year. Your VAT is increasing only at 10%. It has lost its potential. But you come to GST, we guarantee the revenue will increase by 14%. And suppose it doesn't, then that shortfall will be compensated by the central government, for which a separate cess will be imposed on certain selected commodities like tobacco and so on. So this compensation cess, you mobilize resources which will be kept in a separate fund. And whenever a state's revenue falls below the guaranteed level, that shortfall will be compensated. They agreed, they took the base year as 2015-16. From 2015-16, every year cumulatively 14% growth was guaranteed. It was a very attractive proposition. Most of the states couldn't refuse that. And it was agreed for 5 years. And it was written to the constitution that the GST, the state shall, not may, shall be paid the compensation for any shortfall from 14% growth in the GST revenue. So it was on this solemn promise of a guaranteed revenue, buoyant revenue for the next 5 years, states agreed to join the GST system. So that's how GST was ushered in. But then some things happened. One, the central government brought in this demonetization, a disaster. It is a body blow to the economy. It is as if somebody punches the tire of a fast running car. You can imagine what would happen if you shoot the tires of a fast running car. Something like that. They had very crazy notions, CCM. You remove the money, okay, some problems will be there. But then you reinstate the money, print new notes, then entire economy will resurrect. But what happened is whole MSME sector, whole large proportion of them, who just closed up, folded up because of demonetization, never got resurrected. So a recession, GDP growth began to slow. And it began to slow, and because of the other policies of central government, it was very clear that India was going to slip into a recession. And then the central government began to be worried. Now, to maintain this 14% growth in GST revenue in an economy which is decelerating is a very tall order. You can't, it is very, very difficult. So, in fact, they began to toy with the idea, hey, forget this 14%. We had discussed it in a very different time. Now times have changed. In the meeting of the GST Council in Goa, none other than chairman of the 16th Finance Commission, N.K. Singh, came and made a special lecture and said new states now, even in this situation, must revisit. This 14% growth assumption is untenable. You must be willing to reduce this guarantee rate. Every state, including BJP states, everyone virtually said, he won't even consider this. Unanimous stand of the GST Council. So it was not discussed, but central government decided to put pressure on the states. They began to delay the payment of GST compensation. So GST compensation was in arrears and so on. And then in March beginning, just before the parliament session, in the council, already there were arrears of payment of something 50,000 crores. So there was a lot of criticism and so on. Then the Union Finance Minister agreed. After the parliament session in April, we'll have a special session to discuss the compensation. April came, then pandemic came, then we went to May. June, finally, the council meeting was held. There was no item on compensation in the agenda. So we raised it again, and there was a big shouting match. Now, some of the BJP governments changed the stance a bit. There were people who were opposing the way we were raising the issue, and so on. So it was agreed we'll meet in July exclusively to discuss the GST compensation. But no meeting in July. At the end of August, the councilmen and we had a 5-hour discussion, state after state, including Karnataka, even Bihar, stated as a moral obligation and legal obligation of central government to provide the GST compensation, and it was best that central government borrow and make available the money, and so on. And then, at the end of 5-hour discussion, suddenly, totally disconnected what the proceedings of the House, the central government puts forward 2 propositions. Either you take it or leave it. A kind of ultimatum. This is not done. This is unacceptable. This is not the way the council is to run, and that kind of browbeating cannot be accepted. What was the argument of the central government? Central government now wants to distinguish between normal shortfall in the GST revenue and shortfall that is created by extraordinary event. The COVID is one such extraordinary event. Therefore, the proposition number 1 said 3 lakh crores is the compensation required, because that will be the shortfall in GST revenue. But 70,000 crores would come from GST cess. So then there is a remainder 2.3 lakh crores, of which 97,000 crores they calculate is the normal loss. That the central government will borrow and give you the GST cess fund. What about the rest? About 1.3 lakh crores. That's the state's should sacrifice. 2. Second proposition. You states borrow the entire amount, but you'll have to bear the interest of it. This logic I have never understood is, okay, send state borrow, there's to be interest paid to that, but that interest can be recouped from the cess. Why should the state bear? Oh, the argument is the borrowing will have a price and therefore it will discourage states from borrowing. Yeah, that is the reason. So these are the two propositions. Center will borrow about 1 lakh crore and give the states, and states will have to forget rest of the loss. States borrow the entire amount, the interest should have to be borne by states, and also there is an uncertainty, will we be allowed to borrow the full amount, because there are certain conditions of borrowal. So what is our response to it? One, it was elaborately now made clear that Constitution does not make any distinction between loss suffered by normal course of events and extraordinary events. Constitution is very clear. Compensation shall be paid for the loss of revenue in the implementation of GST. So they are interpreting it saying in the implementation of GST means reasons related to implementation. Now, COVID is something extraneous, act of God, and compensation is not promised, guaranteed for this in the Constitution. This is totally silly, legally untenable, because the compensation, the implementation of GST, how implementation is to take place, how GST compensation is to be calculated, is clearly laid down in the Section 7 of compensation law. It's very clear here. If 14% growth with base year as 2015-16, that's a guaranteed revenue. Actual collection, a difference is to be compensated. So very clearly laid down how it is to be calculated. How can there be any doubt what is meant by implementation of GST? Now, this is a very, very strange argument to come in. Even Attorney General, whose opinion was sought by GST Council, whether the sender is obliged, legally bound to pay the compensation from the Consolidated Fund of India. Now he said, legally central government is not bound. It is for the GST Council to decide, recommend to the central government how the payment should be made. That's what AG says. Even AG does not distinguish between the cause, but the compensation by the cause of the loss. So this is legally untenable. This is a position that won't stand scrutiny of the court. But aside from that, the moral obligation of the central government, minister after ministers have quoted, say, various discussions in the council, most famous being that of Arun Jaitley himself, when he said, okay, in eventuality the compensation source fund is insufficient for payment of the compensation, no problem. We will borrow the money required and extend the cess by a year or 2 or 3, for a period that required for recouping the borrowing. So it's very clear. Again, another meeting, this issue was raised, and Secretary of the Council sums up saying the borrowing, why is the solution to it. So everybody is agreed today, the GST Council, even the central government, though they are not willing fully to go along with, solution lies in borrowing. Central government is unwilling to permit full borrowal for the loss, but everybody is agreed there is no solution other than borrow and meet the demand for compensation. But who should borrow? That's the key question. The center can borrow, the state can borrow, who should borrow? Now, state centers should borrow. The second proposition. There are three problems connected with that. First is, when states go to borrow, they have to pay at least 1 to 2% higher rate of interest. The coupon rate for state bonds are 1 to 2% above. Kerala, we went to borrow 6,000 crores to meet our COVID package. 6,000 crores, 20,000 crore COVID package. In April, we ended up in 9%, paying 9%. And India government has decreed something like 4% repo rate. So states will have to pay much higher interest rate. That's number one. Two, for the states to borrow, center has to raise the fiscal deficit ceiling. Center's permission is required. So even in the proposition 2, center has not made clear they are going to give us permit to increase the fiscal deficit ceiling adequately to absorb the sufficient funds. 3, and this is a very serious problem, compensation requirement for state will be different. Each state is different. Say northeastern states, till very recently, they were surplus states. They never required any compensation. But states like, say, Puducherry, their laws have been very heavy. They need compensation as high as 50%. Even states like Haryana. So they need about 50% compensation, which means central government will have to calculate and tweak the permissible fiscal deficit ceiling for each of the states. How is practical? How do you know what should be a state's fiscal deficit ceiling before the end of the year? So impractical. It's costly and it's practical. Therefore, simplest thing is central government to borrow. And this is what every minister in the GST Council was arguing. And then suddenly, the Revenue Secretary comes out with a long lecture on macroeconomic implications of central government borrowing. His first argument was the fiscal deficit would go up. It is very bad for the optics. There may be withdrawal of the foreign funds, which will cause a run on Indian rupee and calamity. Of course, some of us answered that whether the state borrows or center borrows, it has no impact upon the overall fiscal deficit. If center borrows, center's fiscal deficit goes up. State borrows, state's fiscal deficit goes up. What is relevant is the overall fiscal deficit. So, who borrows has little macroeconomic implication whatsoever. And then he gives his second reason. If the central government or state governments to borrow to the entire amount, then what would happen? The interest rate will go up. And that will have a dampening impact on investment and so on and so forth. Interest rates are lowest in history at the present time. And central government going to borrow, say 2.3 lakh crores, are not going to drive up the interest rate. Already you have got a program for stimulus for 21 lakh crore rupees, which is based mostly on borrowing. You compensate for corporates, you compensate for MSME, you compensate even the banks, but not in the states. The states are part of the union here. We are not some outside entities. So anyway, now you don't want to add states which account for 60% of the overall intergovernmental expenditure to be in the stimulus package. Okay, all right. But then if you want to make that borrowing extra to 21 lakh crores package, and you are afraid the interest rate will go up, he told them, you just borrow from the Reserve Bank. Monetize your debt. You don't borrow. You monetize your debt. That's what we were doing till the reforms, till mid 1990s. You see. Then it was felt by Rangarajan, the governor of Reserve Bank, that state and center must be brought to market discipline, and therefore they should borrow from the market like any other entity in the economy. So this monetization of fiscal deficit practice was given up. State and center issue bonds and borrow from the market. But even this Rangarajan who brought this reform is telling today, things are so bad. At this juncture, there is nothing wrong if you monetize part of your debt, borrow from the Reserve Bank. Look at what the Bank of England is doing. They have given unlimited accommodation to the government. Government can borrow any amount, okay, from the Bank of England. So the Federal Reserve, they are buying up not only government bonds, but also private bonds. I mean, the kind of pumping in money for all. Why this national government? Look at IMF. IMF is the most conservative financial institution in the world, neoliberal epitome of neoliberalism, with a long tradition of starting from 1970s, disciplining all the indebted states in the world. Even they are frightened of what is happening in the world due to COVID. And therefore, they took initiative to say, we will print some, I don't know, say 500 billion SDRs. Some huge amount of money. They are willing to print that much SDRs. SDRs are the very simply stated currency operated by IMF, which is not available to individual citizens but are kept in the reserves of the various national central banks. So this is given free. It's as if they are going to provide money without interest, or a minuscule 0.05%. Even the stands have changed, you see. They have issued the SDRs in this manner only in the beginning of 1970s. Never since then. But that's just such is the catastrophe of the world economy They are telling of priming the world economy. Unfortunately, Trump vetoed it, and India was one of the countries who opposed it. Even India would have received something like a huge amount of SDR free. We didn't take it. I don't know what. What is the reason? So even IMF has changed the stance, but not India government. India government don't want to monetize the debt. India government do not want to increase the fiscal deficit beyond a level. Why this fiscal conservatism? They have a strategy. It's not that they're fools. They think they can get out of this crisis at the expense of the people and the states. There's no money, therefore states won't be paid compensation. States will cut the expenditure. Cutting expenditure means less for the people, the welfare. Anyway, central government gives hardly anything. Say, take the case of Kerala, for example. On Autumn Day, the chief minister has said, all right, we are going to increase our welfare payments to 1,400 rupees. 58 lakh people receive 1,400 rupees every month. Okay, not that we have money, but it's a question of priority. We have got to protect the people. 2, there is rice, ration, for all the 20 lakh per households is given free in Kerala. So they get rice, and they are going to get a kit of pulses and condiments and oil for the next 4 months, every month. So that nobody will go hungry in Kerala. And every panchayat has got a 20 rupee canteen. Don't worry if you don't have money, panchayat will pay for the meal you eat. Nobody will go hungry in Kerala. We are preparing to have a floor price for 14 vegetables by November 1st, on which Kerala was formed. So this is see, even one Kerala government is concerned, and therefore even with this dire financial situation, we know if you have to win the fight against COVID, you need the cooperation of the people, and to have the cooperation of the people, you must ensure bare minimum necessities, guaranteed. Now, central government owes Kerala 8,000 crores of rupees, including the month of August. 8,000 crores of rupees, yes, not a small amount. So, if they decide not to give that 8,000 crores of rupees, I don't know, maybe we'll be forced to tighten our purse. So, central government thinking is in this direction. They think they will be able to come out of COVID without high fiscal deficit, carry out a whole lot of reforms like the labor reforms, which will give a message to the entire global finance. Here is a government, here is a state, even in COVID times, never deviated from the holy principles of neoliberalism. And that they think will attract foreign capital in India, accelerate growth, and so on and so forth. So it's a very cold, cruel strategy thought out of escaping from the present crisis, emerging from the present crisis, putting the entire burden on the states and on the people. And therefore, this is totally unacceptable. This macroeconomic explanation, etc., are totally hollow. And if you think deeper, it's a anti-people's strategic vision. And therefore, our proposition is very simple and clear. We won't accept any cut in the compensation. Full compensation must be given. It's a state right enshrined in the Constitution. Enough is enough. We are not willing to step backward any further. Good thing is, Kerala has been taking initiative for the last 2 years to highlight the center-state financial relations into the forefront, the limelight. By our constitution, center has about 60% of the overall revenues. They have the most buoyant revenue sources, while states, which contribute to major portion, 60% of the expenditure, their share in the revenue is only 40%. So there's an imbalance between center and state in fiscal relations. So you have a constitutional body, Finance Commission, which is appointed every 5th year to look at what share of central tax must be distributed among the state. So we have the 16th Finance Commission. Now, central government wants to use the 15th Finance Commission to further tilt the balance of center-state financial relations in favor of the center. In 1950-51, the gap between the overall expenditure and revenue of the state, both after the devolution for Finance Commission, was about 1.5%. Now it is around 6%. The imbalance between the states and center has widened. And the terms of reference, central government introduced a number of clauses which almost predetermined the outcome against the states. Whether 42% should be devolved, as was recommended by the previous commission, whether there should be conditions on borrowing. So far, there have been no conditions imposed on borrowing, so there should be conditions imposed on borrowing by the states. Whether there should be revenue deficit grant given at all. And like that, many leading questions in the terms of reference. Since then, Kerala has taken initiative to have 4 national level consultations. Took lead in having a number of webinars and so on this issue, single issue. And today, on this particular issue, as I told you, all the states share a common feeling. But given the political ties, I don't know if BJP governments are going to come forward to join a protest. But already 6 state governments of Punjab, Bengal, Delhi, Chhattisgarh, and Kerala, we have met, and decided to challenge the stand taken by the center. We are going to meet again very shortly, another 2-3 days' time. We are thinking perhaps 12 states may join, at least 10 surely, and we are going to take a united stand. I think the center-state relations are becoming an important focal point of national politics. BJP is a party that doesn't accept the diversity of India. They want to subsume everything under one nation. And if you look at every law or policy statement under this new government, the common denominator among them for all is abridgment of the state rights. Of course, worst has been the Article 370, Kashmir. The state can be done away with, just liquidated by the center. What happened to Kashmir had happened to any other states. They don't have, other states don't have the protection of Article 370. Or you take educational policy, the electricity bill, the NIA Act, CA. The common denominator for all these laws and policies are encroachment on the state rights. And today, you find that the GST compensation payment has become a central problem, not just between states and center in national politics. I think there has to be mobilization of public opinion and people in support of the state, in every state, trying to explaining the implications of what is being proposed by the center for the welfare of the people. You see, there's a direct connection. Non-payment or GST compensation would mean drastic cut in the state government expenditure in COVID times. It has very serious welfare implications. So this message should be taken to the people, and we should not allow the central government to get away free like that. This should be challenged in the parliament, which is going to meet, in the center state forums, and also in the larger political arena. I hope this short presentation of mine would have clarified some of the major issues that were that are there. So, I thank you all for listening to me. Thank you very much.